Picture this. It is the 22nd of October, 1969. A room full of American motoring journalists is gathered at the Pierre Hotel in New York City, one of the finest addresses in Manhattan. Nissan has flown them in to see something new. Something they have been told is a sports car from Japan. The room is politely skeptical. Japanese cars in 1969 meant economy. Reliability, perhaps. But a sports car? Nobody in that room would have paid serious money for a Japanese sports car. Nobody thought one existed. And then the covers came off the Datsun 240Z. What happened next is one of the most dramatic reversals of expectation in automotive history. The New York Times compared its lines to those of the Jaguar. The Los Angeles Times praised it without reservation. And the price? When the journalists saw the price, $3,526, there was a pause in the room that no press officer had quite prepared for. A Jaguar E-Type cost more than twice that. A Porsche 911 cost more than twice that. Even an Alfa Romeo Spider, which was neither a Jaguar nor a Porsche, cost considerably more. For $3,526, Nissan was offering a two-seat, straight-six sports coupe with four-wheel independent suspension, rack and pinion steering, front disc brakes, and a top speed of 125 miles per hour. In a body that rode and tracks Ron Wakefield in his 1970 road test called an outright bargain, and said he believed Datsun had a winner on its hands. He was, as it turned out, understating the case considerably. Within months of its American launch, Datsun dealerships had waiting lists stretching to a year. By 1972, production had reached 60,025 units in a single calendar year. The car that European manufacturers had dismissed as an irrelevance from a country they did not yet take seriously had, in the space of 3 years, redrawn the map of the entire affordable sports car market. This is the story of how the 240Z happened, who made it happen, and why Europe never saw it coming. Section 1. The man who was sent to California as a punishment. To understand the 240Z, you have to understand Yutaka Katayama, because without him, there is no 240Z. There is probably no Nissan in America at all. Katayama was born in 1909 in Shizuoka Prefecture, Japan. He joined Nissan in 1935 and spent his early years in the company's marketing department. He was, by every account, a difficult man for corporate Japan to accommodate. He had creative instincts, an aggressive approach to business, and a belief in the value of motorsport and driver engagement that sat very uneasily in an organization built on hierarchy and conformity. His superiors found him exhausting. So in the early 1960s, Nissan decided to deal with the problem by sending him to Southern California to conduct market research. It was not, by the standards of Japanese corporate culture, a compliment. Nissan had essentially no presence on the West Coast. The assignment was closer to exile than opportunity. Katayama did not come home. Instead, he stayed. He studied the American market with the same intensity he had brought to everything else. He began building a dealer network from nothing. He watched Californian driving culture, the long freeways, the mountain roads, the weekend canyon runs, and he arrived at a conclusion that changed everything. Americans did not just want cheap transport. Americans wanted to feel something when they drove. They wanted a car that was, in his own words, like being one with a horse. A machine that responded to the driver, that rewarded skill, that gave a feeling of jubilation beyond rational explanation. The early Datsun products he had to sell did not do that. They were competent, economical, and about as exciting as a filing cabinet. Katayama lobbied Japan constantly. He needed cars that could compete. Cars that carried ambition. The turning point came with the Datsun 510 inches 1967. It was a saloon, a four-door family car, but Katayama had pushed hard for its independent rear suspension, its handling balance, its honest driver's character. In America, it sold beyond anyone's expectations, and in SCCA club racing it began winning races. The message from the market was unmistakable. Americans would buy a Japanese car if that Japanese car was genuinely good. With the 510 established, Katayama turned his full attention back to something he had been arguing for since the early 1960s. Not a family saloon, a sports car, a proper one. Something with the visual ambition of a Jaguar E-Type and the reliability of a Datsun, a car that would cost what an ordinary working American could actually afford. Back in Japan, in Nissan's sports car styling studio number 4, a designer named Yoshihiko Matsuo had been working on exactly that idea since 1965. He had been sketching a closed coupe, not a roadster, which the safety regulations coming out of Washington were about to make commercially difficult, with a long bonnet, a sweeping roofline that ran back to a practical hatchback tail, and a cabin designed for 2 people who wanted to be somewhere rather than simply to be seen going there. Matsuo has said in print that it was Katayama's words during a visit to the studio that crystallized his own ambition. That they could go on making cheap economy cars indefinitely, but by doing so, they would never move forward. In the autumn of 1967, the first full fiberglass prototype existed. Katayama saw it. He pushed Nissan's engineering department to accelerate. By 1968, the decision to build the car for production had been made. By October 1969, it was standing in a ballroom at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, and the world was about to have its expectations revised. But before the car could be shown, Katayama had one more battle to fight. Every single 240Z that arrived from Japan was badged as the Fair Lady Z. The name came from Nissan President Katsuji Kawamata's personal enthusiasm for the Lerner and Loewe musical, My Fair Lady. Katayama, who understood American masculinity rather better than anyone in Tokyo, was appalled. He personally ensured that every Fair Lady badge was removed before a single car went near a dealership. In America, it would be the 240Z. The 240 designation referred to the 2.4-liter engine. Simple, honest, automotive. R2. The Fair Lady name survived in Japan, where it continues to this day. But, in the market that mattered most in 1969, Katayama's instincts proved, once again, to be correct. Section 2. What you got for $3,526. To appreciate what the 240Z offered in 1969, you need to look at what else was available at that price point, and then look at what was available above it. The MGB, which had been the standard British entry in the affordable sports car category, was a 2-seat roadster with a 4-cylinder engine, a live rear axle, and zero pretensions about circuit performance. It was charming. It was characterful. It leaked when it rained, and the handling could be alarming if you pushed it on unfamiliar roads. The Alfa Romeo Spider was more refined and more rewarding to drive, but it also cost considerably more and was, by any rational measure, fragile in American conditions. The Opel GT looked dramatic, but was powered by a 4-cylinder unit that produced nothing like the performance its styling implied. None of these cars had a 6-cylinder engine. None of them had 4-wheel independent suspension. None of them had rack and pinion steering. For those features in 1969, you went to the Jaguar E-Type at around $7,000, or the Porsche 911 at around $7,500. These were extraordinary machines, but they were not machines that a young engineer in Burbank or a junior sales manager in Dallas could walk into a showroom and drive away in. The 240Z offered all of it at half the price. The engine was Nissan's L24, a 2.4-liter, single overhead camshaft, inline 6-cylinder unit with a 7-bearing crankshaft and twin Hitachi carburetors derived from the SU design. In American specification, it produced 151 horsepower by SAE gross measurement, with 146 pounds-feet of torque at 4,400 revolutions per minute. The maximum recommended engine speed was 7,000 revolutions per minute. The engine was smooth in a way that 4-cylinder rivals simply could not match at sustained high speed, and it sounded right, a proper straight 6-note, purposeful and even-tempered, that rewarded the driver who worked through the 5-speed gearbox. The suspension was the other story that magazines could not stop telling. McPherson struts with coil springs and an anti-roll bar at the front. Chapman struts with lower wishbones and coil springs at the rear, fully independent on both axles. In 1969, that combination in a car at this price was not merely unusual, it was astonishing. The MGB had a live rear axle. The Triumph TR6 had a live rear axle. The 240Z was playing by the same technical rules as the Jaguar and the Porsche. The body was a steel monocoque, a proper full steel construction, not a body bolted to a separate ladder chassis with a long, sweeping bonnet that ran back to a fastback roofline and then to a practical rear hatch. The wheelbase was 90.7 inches. The car was 169.5 inches long and 66.5 inches wide. It weighed 2,355 pounds. That is a light car. A genuinely light car compared to its six-cylinder European rivals. Car and Driver ran the numbers and published their findings in June 1970. 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 8 seconds. A top speed of 125 miles per hour. Quarter mile in the mid-16s. These were not the numbers of a budget car making excuses. These were sports car numbers, real ones. The standard equipment list was another element that made the press pause. A wood-rimmed steering wheel, a full set of instruments including a tachometer and oil pressure gauge, reclining bucket seats, a rear hatch that opened to a usable luggage space. Items that European manufacturers at twice the price were charging extra for came standard on the 240Z. There was, inevitably, criticism. The interior materials were not up to the standard of Porsche. The gearshift action was not as precise as an Alfa. The brakes were discs at the front and drums at the rear, a combination that the European press noted without enthusiasm. These were genuine observations. But when the reviewers looked at the price again, the criticism softened. At $3,526, the question was never what the 240Z lacked. The question was how Nissan had managed to include so much. Section 3, the conquest, racetracks, records, and a production line running flat out. The 240Z's impact on the American market was not slow and gradual. It was immediate, and it overwhelmed the organization that had built it. In 1970, the first full model year in the United States, Nissan produced 17,005 examples of the 240Z for export. Dealers could not get enough of them. Waiting lists at some showrooms stretched to 12 months. Nissan raised its production target to 4,000 units per month and still fell short of demand. By August of 1970, the decision was made to cease production of the older Datsun Sports Roadster entirely and convert those assembly lines to 240Z production, giving the factory the capacity to build 7,500 units per month. It was a straight swap. The old car was outselling the new one at a ratio of roughly 16,000 to 1,285 in America, at the point the decision was made. The business case wrote itself. By 1971, annual production had reached 40,219 units. By 1972, the peak year of 240Z production, 60,025 cars left the factory. Over the entire run of the 240Z, from 1969 to 1973, Nissan produced approximately 164,616 examples for export worldwide, with the United States accounting for roughly 90% of all cars sold. The racing program reinforced everything the road tests were saying. The Sports Car Club of America, the SCCA, had been dominated for years by British and European machinery. The 240Z entered and began winning almost immediately. Bob Sharp Racing became the flagship Nissan effort in America, and the team's most famous driver was not a professional racer by trade. It was Paul Newman, the actor, who drove Datsun machinery for Bob Sharp from the mid-1970s onwards and competed at a genuinely high level. Newman was not a celebrity doing public relations laps. He was a racing driver who happened to also make films, and he took the Z-Car program seriously enough to compete at the top of his class. year after year. John Morton also drove for the Brock Racing Enterprises team BRE, which prepared 240Z competition cars with a discipline and intelligence that produced results disproportionate to the budget available. The BRE cars won the SCCA C Production Class Championship in 1970 and 1971. These were not minor domestic victories. The SCCA championships were taken seriously by the manufacturers, whose cars were being beaten. European sports car makers watched the results coming through and reached for the same uncomfortable conclusion the press had already reached. The Japanese had made a proper car. The 240Z also competed internationally. In the East African Safari Rally, it demonstrated the same structural reliability that the land crab had shown in the London-Sydney Marathon, the ability to absorb punishment over rough roads that would destroy a less honestly built machine. Meanwhile, back in the showrooms, the cultural resonance of the car was building in ways that Katayama had anticipated, but that even he may not have fully foreseen. The 240Z was the right car for 1970 America, in a way that went beyond its specification sheet. It was affordable enough for the generation that had grown up watching the muscle car era price itself out of reach. It was sophisticated enough to be aspirational. It was Japanese enough to be genuinely new, genuinely different, without being so unfamiliar that it provoked anxiety. It was, in the precise language of marketing that nobody at Nissan would have used in 1969, cool. In 1998, when Yutaka Katayama was inducted into the Automobile Hall of Fame in Detroit at the age of 89, he brought Yoshihiko Matsuo with him. Not because protocol required it, but because Katayama insisted that the man who had turned his vision into steel and glass be there when the recognition was given. Katayama died in 2015 at the age of 105. His title within the Z-car community, Mr. K, Father of the Z, had by then been earned many times over. In 2004, Sports Car International named the Datsun 240Z number 2 on their list of the top sports cars of the 1970s. In the same decade, classic car values began their steady rise. A 1970 example in clean, original condition, which could have been bought for a few $100s in the early 1990s, was by the mid-2000s changing hands at auction for sums that would have seemed absurd to anyone who had watched Nissan dealers struggling to shift the first shipments in 1963. Let's go back to that room at the Pierre Hotel in October 1969. The covers come off, the price is announced, and the European sports car manufacturers, had they been in the room, would have been looking at a car that undercut their entry-level offerings while delivering specification that matched or exceeded their premium products. The 240Z's achievement was not a lucky accident. It was the result of one man's decade-long argument with a corporation that did not want to listen, a designer who refused to compromise his vision downward to fit his management's conservative instincts, and an engineering team that understood exactly what they were building and built it honestly. Katayama wanted a reliable E-Type at half the price. Matsuo designed it. The factory built it. And America bought it in numbers that left no room for debate about whether Japanese sports cars deserve to be taken seriously. The Jaguar E-Type remains one of the most beautiful objects ever manufactured. The Porsche 911 is, by any measure, a masterpiece of continuous engineering refinement. But in 1969, neither of them could be bought by the kind of person who actually drove the roads that Katayama understood, the canyon runs north of Los Angeles, the weekend trips through the Appalachians, the long flat interstate stretches where a straight six with a 5-speed manual and a good soundtrack made the miles feel shorter. For $3,526, the 240Z could be, and it was. If you owned one or own one still, or if you remember the first time you saw one sitting in a dealership window and understood that something had changed, we want to hear about it. The comment section is yours. These cars carry real stories, driven by real people, and those accounts are worth considerably more than anything we can add in a studio. If this program has been worth your time, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what allows us to keep making these films for an audience that knows these cars as well as we do, and often better. We are genuinely grateful for it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.